Hey, Chris.
Hey, Adam, how you doing, man?
Hey, what do you want to do today?
We could record some stuff about video games.
Again?
Yeah, I know.
Do we gotta?
The thing is, I forgot to explain this to you. If you start a podcast, people tend to expect you to do more than one or two.
But what for?
I don't know. I don't get it either.
All right, welcome to the Astrocast number 3.
What have you been doing this weekend? You went to an arcade or something.
I did. Last weekend I went to a barcade for the first time here in Albuquerque. It's called Sister Bar. They had about 15, 20 games, something like that. Ended up playing a couple of games I hadn't played in many, many years, at least in the arcade. I got to play Centipede. Frogger got to enter a high score in a couple of games because, well, I think they get turned off and lose some of their scores at night. And I also, for the very first time, got to play Donkey Kong in the arcade, which I've never done before.
Really?
Yeah.
You've never played it in the arcade?
Never. I've seen it. I remember growing up seeing it at a place I used to go and buy from the bargain bins at Atari 2600 games. And I was able to see it, but I never got a quarter for it. So
yeah, I got to play it at Howard Johnson's here in Albuquerque. You know, my mother would bring us there as a special treat. We get the Howard Johnson's chicken nuggets, and they had a Donkey Kong there. My younger brother liked it more than I did, but I liked it too because it was a video game I hadn't played yet.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. And it actually is very hard. I mean, I've heard it's a hard game, and I couldn't even get up past the second set of girders, and that's pretty pathetic. But it was still a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
If you've never played it before, so the only time you've played the coin-op version has been in MAME?
Right.
I shouldn't act surprised. I think that's the only time I ever played it was at Howard Johnson's in 1982 or whatever. But I was really happy to hear that you went to this arcade because I didn't know Albuquerque had one.
One little story I mentioned to you offhandedly, but it's worth sharing is I had if I've played Defender in the arcade, I don't remember. So I played it and I didn't remember or didn't know that the joystick only goes up and down. There's your thrust button. So I put in my quarter and I really didn't get to play much. And I was very intimidated, and I can see why people talk about it that way because it is kind of an intimidating game.
And those controls take a few practice games to figure out, but because of all the different buttons and joysticks and pulleys and levers and yo-yos and stuff, it grants you minute, flexible control.
Well, something else I'd forgotten about arcades, because while I played arcade games once in a while, I was never into the arcades when I was growing up. I mean, home systems were better for me because I didn't have to have money. But the other day, when I was playing Frogger, the controller was a little messed up, but it worked fine. You just had to get used to it because it tended to want to make you go to the right. And so I'd press up or down, and if I didn't press it just exactly correctly, I would go to the right, and which usually would kill me. And it's also interesting how you forget how some of the video games you play on the home systems vary so much from the arcade. And a simple thing like I play Frogger the most on the Atari 8-bit computers. They've got a really great version by someone named John Harris, and when you're on the logs and you let's say you're going to get a fly that's near the end of a log, or not the fly, your honey. You're the Mrs. Frogger.
Yeah.
So you go to get it, and if she's at the end of the log, you stop when you get her. In the arcade, if you're near the end of the log and you hop to get her, you just hop right off the log.
Yeah, you die.
And I was like,
Yeah.
And I was playing for real money. This was not fake money now. This was not like, what is it? What do you press, 5 to get coins in MAME? Is that what it is?
Oh, you put a real quarter?
Yes.
And no redemption tickets?
I didn't get anything. I wouldn't have earned them anyway if there was such a thing.
Damn redemption games. Sometimes it does take an entire one practice game to ascertain the old age controller bias. It's like, okay, this one pulls you to the left. I got it.
Mm-hmm. That's a great way to put it. Bias, yeah. So earlier today we headed over to the mall, which is something we never have ever done together, I don't think.
Haven't been inside that in 30 years.
Yeah, well, good for you. Lucky you. Well, last week I went and my wife and I, we stopped by to Macy's. I wanted to get a new ring because I lost my wedding ring, and she bought me a new one, actually. Thank you, baby. And I
didn't know that.
Yeah, I lost my wedding ring last November. Hey, what is that ring on your finger? It's really nice. So I ended up seeing that there was a new video game store. They're called We Know Video Games or something like that.
Yeah.
And they had a couple of arcade games in there, mostly fighting games, and a couple of pinball games. And they had Asteroids, which I have not played since the 80s in the arcades. And I want to say it was the first time I played, but I know it's not because I played Asteroids Deluxe, and I guess that counts. It's practically the same thing. We went in there today and we spent $1.
Yeah, that was fun.
Well, you know what's interesting is when I played it last week, I just played 2 games, I think, and I really did terrible. And today I did
You did very well.
Not good either, but I did better than I did last time. Like, I thought last week that it played really fast, and I played just as fast today. But I thought I was on some super fast setting, but it just turns out I'm really slow, and that's my issue.
The arcade game. Yeah. We got the arcade experience with Asteroids. This kind of thing seldom happens in Albuquerque. And I always get so jealous listening to the guys in Chicago. And even the 10 Pence Arcade guys, they have all these meets and they have these, guys who will open up their backyards and their tents and things.
Barbecues and stuff like that people will do too.
So what else did they have? Asteroids, they had Ms. Pac-Man. They had another one that I thought was all right, Commando.
Yeah, I didn't play that one.
A bunch of Hayyak games, and I don't really like those.
I think they had Kung Fu Master. Oh, that was actually at Sister Bar. Never mind.
Sister Bar. Well, I want to go to Brother Bar now. Sister Bar, you said it was above Anodyne?
Below Anodyne.
Below, rather? That's funny. It's below a bar we used to play at. Yeah, the only arcade I can remember we had here besides the game room and putt-putt was Tilt, which was also in the mall. So, yeah, it's been over 30 years since Tilt closed.
Yeah, and that closed a long time ago.
Anyway, yeah, it was fun. I'm glad we did that today before recording. I'd like to ask you something, actually. I'm glad I just remembered this. Speaking of pie factories, Jim and Sean were talking about the adventures of Robbie Roto during this last episode.
Oh, okay. That game uses the Astrocade chipset. That's probably what you're going to say. But...
Well, they mentioned that, and that Nutting developed it, and I didn't know that. I thought Nutting had only developed games that were released by Midway. You know what I mean? So all those early Midway games, Gorf, Wizard of War, Omega Race, I thought that was it. And once it became Bally Midway, I didn't realize Nutting was involved anymore.
Well, that game was released in that time period, though.
I just thought when you saw Bally Midway, I thought that meant no more Nutting. I don't know why. I came to this conclusion on my own.
So what did they have to say about it? I'm curious.
Well, what I would say about the game, except they were much nicer about it. I would say the game sucks. I don't like it at all.
Yeah, it's not a great game.
They pulled a Chris, which is what I should do with that game one of these days. They really tried to find the fun in it. And they found some fun in it.
Did they?
Yeah. The problem... Are you familiar with the game?
Yes.
Okay, the problem they really had...
Yeah, only in MAME. I've never seen it in an arcade. I remember reading once that they were only made like 500 of them or something like that.
But the problem they had with it, the main problem, especially Jim, was that on some screens you can't tell where you can go because it's not delineated where the solid ground is.
Yes, that is not like Dig Dug. It kind of is similar to Dig Dug, but it's not the same. Like you can't just dig your own path anywhere.
Right, and you can tell, I guess, in the early screens, but later on, it's not as demarcated where you can go. And so he found himself planning routes to get a hostage and stay alive and make it back out. And he found when he got to a certain part on the screen, with very little visual clues, he couldn't move where he wanted to,
A few years back, well, more than a few years back, probably about 2002, there was some postings on the Yahoo group, someone who worked at Astrovision, and they had some kind of ins with the nutting, and they had played the prototype version of that game, and apparently it was a much, much better game in prototype form before people got a hold of it and said, you need to make some changes to it. Oh. And so he was hoping that someone out there would have the prototype and it would just pop up someday, but it's never popped up.
I wonder if it's better.
He thought it was a great game. He said the release version was, I don't remember exactly how he put it, but basically crap, So there's a post that was made November 26th by Tom Meeks. Tom Meeks was the product manager for Astrocade Incorporated until they closed down. He says, Robbie Roto, by the way, wasn't created until just before we filed for Chapter 11. While in development, it was the most fun game I had ever played. Unfortunately, the Midway brass forced DNA to change it so that it played shorter, and it absolutely ruined the game. The game released to the field was, to me, only a poor shadow of what it had been in the latter stages of development. If anyone could find that code, then they would really have something. And that's what he ends up saying there. And as far as I know, that's never been found or anything like that. So if you know different, let me know.
I'm glad you found that.
It's good. There's a lot of great stuff in the past posts. I mean, that's from 15 years ago. Right. I've been talking about the Bally for a long time.
A lot of the swine in suits who did not design or program the games would make the designers and programmers make games harder. I call that pulling a Sinistar in my head because of an interview I watched with the guy who was chiefly responsible for Sinistar for Williams, and I guess the Williams suits said you got to make it harder. And that's a game that
they needed to, because that game is so easy.
Oh yeah, it's just a walk in the park, isn't it? I wonder how many companies did that. Not people who are artists in any capacity, but the money people said you got to make that harder. And so I wonder if that was it. I wonder if the first version of Robbie Roto...
Is that why Sinistar is so hard?
Yeah. This is for Jimmy G. We're moving now, huh? You know, we've never given the timeline of this. Correct me if I'm wrong then, right? When Bally was still just Bally, they came up with this idea for a home system. Nutting helped them design, or
They did design it.
Designed it entirely. Eventually, when Bally said we want out, Astrovision bought the rights to the console
In 1980, I think. It wasn't re-released in 81.
Okay, and then Astrovision became Astrocade. According to a magazine blurb I read from one of the early 80s magazines, Astrovision was already the name of a porn VHS tape company. So they had to change their name, changed it to Astrocade, which I like more anyway myself.
You pointed that out to me, and I looked it up, and I could not find it, but it seems very reasonable to me, because I did find...
I'll show you the issue if you want.
No, I have it. It's on Bally Alley. It's in there. I should probably put it in the show notes.
Okay.
You pointed that out to me. But since we have been talking about these high-res arcade games, which is they use a chip, the Astrocade chipset, but they have 16K of RAM instead of 4, or at least the earliest ones did. Then they even added more than that, and they added additional hardware.
So the console only has 4.
4K of screen RAM only, actually.
Okay.
The Astrocade uses bit mapping, which is great. It makes it so much more easy to program than the 2600. But to that effect, the 2600 can do a lot of things. Later, when they had the programmers pushing its boundaries, you got a lot of stuff out of there, which you probably wouldn't ever be able to get out of the Astrocade, in my opinion. But back to the high-res versions of the Astrocade, there was at least 2 different people, John Perkins and Michael C. Matt, who came up with their own versions and modified their personal Astrocades to work in high-res mode. And I found out just today, going through some documentation that I posted onto ballyalley.com, that Michael Matt actually wrote some high-res demos on his Astrocade. So he sold the tape for $7. It came with some demos, and I would love to see that. Of course, I never probably will. Or will I? So today I went on the internet, tried to find the guy, I wrote him a letter, and maybe I'll get something back in snail mail. We'll see.
What's the deal? There's a high-res mode in the Astrocade that's locked in there, or there's a way to modify the hardware so you can
modify the hardware.
You can get the same high-res mode as you'd see in one of these arcade games we're talking
Correct. About. It's actually, when we call it high-res mode, what they called it originally was consumer mode, that's the Astrocade, and commercial mode, which is the high-res mode, and that's what was used in the arcades. It had 16K of RAM, but there were also they also hooked up the chips a little bit differently. I'm not familiar with how that worked at all. I do know, you can look at the Seawolf schematics, and it'll kind of explain some of that, and you can, I guess, work backward if you're technical enough and had the willpower. You could make your Astrocade high res.
I guess I already knew this. Just because you say an arcade game has the Bally Astrocade hardware in it or chipset doesn't mean that if you could somehow magically put the PCB of one of these arcade games on a cartridge, it still isn't going to run on the Astrocade.
No, it would not.
We've gotten more feedback. Not as much as we'd like, but I'm sure you guys will get on that at some point.
I'm going to read something that was posted on the Atari Age forums from William Culver. And right here is a great place to thank you, Willie, because you've been working on the Facebook page and you're sort of promoting us. So thanks for doing that, because I'm not a good self-promoter. He says, the Z-Grass was the one that was mounted under the Bally. So this wouldn't have been the UV1. This would have been the add under. I only saw it the one time at my dad's work. Don't know what became of it. My dad bought me the white Bally for himself due to me constantly hogging the original one.
So the Z-Grass, what he's talking about is the Z-Grass keyboard.
Well, the Z-Grass keyboard, yeah. People, it was a language. Let's get this straight here, because I do this all the time. I use them one for the other because that's just it was called the Z-Grass unit. It was also the Z-Grass language.
Okay.
Technically, I guess the Bally unit would have been called the add under, which would have featured Z-Grass as the language. But it pretty much was known as the Z-Grass. Later on, when it was re-released, when Datamax released it as UV1, and then even after that, it was going to get released by the people who made the Viper, but it never came out.
So what about the Z-Grass keyboard? You used to have a keyboard, or you were borrowing it, or something.
I know what you're talking about. So there was a blue RAM. It was a little box. It was a project box that used to be able to pick up a Radio Shack. They were blue, and you put your projects in it. And so they built Perkins Engineering created a RAM expansion for the Astrocade that you could plug in keyboards to. I have I got rid of one and I got another one, a keyboard that plugs into the Astrocade. I never use it. I actually find it easier to type on the 24 key keypad than typing on an ASCII keyboard.
Or you're used to it.
Yeah. But it works with it. It works fine. You'd think it would make typing so much faster, but it really doesn't. Because you still have to use shift and a key in order to type a word in BASIC. So
I see. So the keyboard wasn't manufactured by Blue Ram people.
It was manufactured by the Blue Ram people. Perkins Engineering created the keyboard for their own expansion.
All right. Okay. So it had nothing to do with Z-Grass. I just combined them in my head. Okay.
Although what's interesting about that is I picked that up from someone here in town when I was looking through the Arcadian back in 1996 or so. I noticed that there was someone named Jim Fauci who had a user group, and I was like, Jim Fauci, who? I think I've heard of that guy somewhere, but I couldn't place it. So I was like, I called the number. He was still at this number in 1996, which was about 15, 16 years later, and eventually got together with him. He actually used to be part of the Amiga user group before I was part of it. And so I went to his house, and he's the one who gave me the Blue Ram, gave me the keyboard for it. We got to talk. Well, on the phone, he told me he had a Z-Grass keyboard, and I was like, oh, that's great. So even he thought he had a Z-Grass keyboard, but it was not. It was the Blue Ram keyboard. And so when I got it, I took one look at it, and I knew it wasn't a Z-Grass keyboard. But I was still excited. I was like, wow, I have extra RAM, and I had a better BASICs all of a sudden. That version that he had added 16K, which was
holy cow,
pretty impressive for the time. I also ended up getting a Viper RAM expansion, which also added 16K, but was much larger. And that had a RAM or a keyboard made for that as well.
So if you were so inclined, you could use that keyboard to program in the language called Z-Grass, which was made capable because of this add under unit. Okay.
No.
All right.
Z-Grass
I'm asking what I think the listeners are thinking right now.
Yeah, I know. This is great. No, I'm glad you are, because I just presume people know these things because the Z-Grass was released. The language Z-Grass was released on disk for the UV1 computer, which was that computer I talked about in, I think, episode 0 when I was kind of giving a little bit of history of the Astrocade. Mm-hmm. And this system, no one has one, so...
But it was sold.
It was sold. It's not been archived. That's the word I'm looking for. Z-Grass, the language, has not been archived.
It never made it to the Astrocade, this language. I mean, because there was not a floppy drive. Okay.
No. But the Viper, which they made they were a company that they were called Viper Systems. They made the Viper RAM expansion in about 1984. Now, this is 6 years after the add-under, or Z-Grass, as some people call it, was supposed to have come out. They said they finally got the rights for Z-Grass 32, which is a 32K ROM, which had Z-Grass on it and was built. They were going to build it into the Z-Grass unit they were going to release, which is what just sold a few months back to the National Video Game Museum in Texas. So they have it. If they can ever dump the ROM, that'd be great.
So do you remember what each letter stood for?
No.
There's a quiz for you.
No.
I get stuck at the Z. What the hell would that stand for?
Well, I know the Z stands for Z80 because
Zippy O.
Grass was the language originally, and it was not written for... Grass was the language that, the tunnel sequence in Star Wars that has, like, when in the very first Star Wars from 1977, the same year as the Astrocade was supposed to have been released in September.
Cosmic.
There's the orbiting Death Star, and they go down the trench, kind of like in a 3D thing. That was created in the Grass language on a mini computer, I guess. It's an article about it. I'll put it in the show notes. It's really fun reading.
Oh, you mean where they're looking at the sort of wireframe simulation? Okay, because I was going to say, Adam, those were models, but I see what you mean. The part in Star Wars that's supposed to look computerized.
Yes.
Never knew that.
Yeah. So Z-Grass was originally called Z-Grass, and then it became called Z-Grass 32 because it got plopped onto a 32K ROM. And that's how that number came about.
And then Z-Basic came along, and nobody needed that anymore. The first game we're going to be talking about is Crazy Climber, a conversion of the 1980 coin-op that was developed by Nichibutsu. I love that word. It sounds like a war cry. A lot of those Japanese names are so cool to me. I want to change my name from Christopher to Nichibutsu.
Chris is like making karate chops with his hands.
Well, it's like a surprise word. It's sort of like, hello, how are you? Nichibutsu. No! But it was released in America by Taito America. And this was the second of 2 homemade games. And I think the 2 only homebrew cartridges, is that right, that were released in the 21st century for the Bally Astrocade.
Yes. You could say it like that. Is a great way to put it, because in my opinion, some of the third-party games maybe even all of the third-party games almost were homebrew games back in the 80s for the Astrocade, but technically, yes, you're right. Crazy Climber was released in 2011 by Riff Raff Games. It was programmed by Michael Garber. Riff Raff Games is basically just Michael Garber. I helped with the release of this game. I soldered together War, the first cartridge. I soldered together the PCB and the EEPROM and stuff like that. This one, I didn't actually do that. I made the manual, got the manuals printed up on some paper, found the cartridge case that we use, which is a DVD case, because it actually works pretty well. It's not a standard DVD case. I actually went online and went to this company that sold all sorts of boxes, and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to make a game release, and I told them dimensions I wanted, and they were really kind. They sent me for free. I didn't even have to pay shipping or anything. They sent me like 12 or 14 different kinds of boxes that were for DVDs that were all different sizes, and from one of those I picked out the one I liked. So those things must be dirt cheap. I mean, they sell them for like $1 a piece, but since they sent me so many samples, so that we bought two packages.
Do you remember the name of the company offhand?
No, I don't. Really nice guys. They sent me, then we bought a package of 50, and we only needed 20, but it was actually cheaper to buy them by a box of 50 than buy them individually. The cartridge shells were third-party cartridge shells from back in the mid-80s. There were still some around.
How did you get hold of those?
There was someone named Michael White who used to have them. He used to sell the cartridge shells, the PCBs, and an EEPROM, and the screws you needed to put it together, up until basically we ran them out for $10 a piece. And they were just, in fact, for like a little more than that, he'd put out a game on there for you, whatever game you wanted. But that's how we released the first ones, and that's how we released War, which was the first game, and then we released Crazy Climber in a similar manner. But then the PCB got redesigned by Ken Lill, and he made his own, and it works better and it's easier to work with for him.
The PCB for War?
For Crazy Climber.
For Crazy Climber. Is that what wound up being duplicated?
What do you mean by that?
You soldered together the first PCB for Crazy Climber.
For War.
For War, okay. Did Michael do them himself for Crazy Climber?
Ken Lill did. Ken Lill was the one who soldered together the cartridges for Crazy Climber.
Okay, so that was the one that was disseminated, was Ken Lill's design.
Correct. There were 50 cartridges made. They all went out. Only one of them, I think, that I can recall, got sent overseas. It got sent to a video game magazine in France. Some guy bought it there. And he emails me and he says, hey, I start the game and I get up a little ways up the building and it doesn't work anymore. I was like, what? So I was like, send it back. What can I do? I plugged it in, and we'd tried all the cartridges. So we tried them, but we didn't play them all the way through. So weirdly, for that cartridge, you would get up about halfway through the building and it would crash. So
just a bad...
Yeah, bad burn on the EEPROM, I guess. So I sent it off to Ken Lill. He fixed it and sent it off to the guy.
On the back of the insert that comes in the box for War, which is a very good Warlords clone for the Astrocade, Michael's first game, something you also helped him with a great deal. I know you wouldn't claim to have helped with the coding, but almost everything else.
Well, he did. I mean, my part is so minor. I mean, he creates the game. I feel like I don't do anything. He thanked me, and that's great.
And you wrote the manual, I think, right?
Yes, I did.
Anyway, on the back of this, it talks about, Michael, I guess, describes his background. On the back of the packaging here, War is the first machine language homebrew game released for the Bally Arcade / Astrocade on cartridge since the mid-80s. It's easily as good as many of the efforts from that period of time, and certainly allows plenty of fun and, quote, friendly competition between friends in a way that few other games on the Astrocade allow. Oh, you wrote this. It is wonderful to see such effort put into a new game for a system that very few people even know exists. I was just going to say, if he wrote this, it's like, okay, man, we know you're cool. but this is definitely Adam's language. Michael Garber, War's programmer, answers a few questions and gives some advice about his game. What is your programming background? I have been programming, I don't know what he sounds like. I've been programming since 1980 when I was a kid. I've always loved video games, and programming them was my dream job ever since I had my Atari 2600. I think that went for a lot of us, Mike. My first published game was Beyond Dark Castle for the Commodore 64, published by Activision. See, I never knew that until last week, because the guy who, as far as I know, drew all the graphics for Beyond Dark Castle is Mark Stephen Pierce, who also came up with the concept and graphics for Klax, the Atari coin-op.
It's a great game.
Yeah, and I just wrote an article about it for Orphaned Games, .com, and I didn't realize, I mentioned that he had been responsible for the graphics of Beyond Dark Castle. I didn't realize it was your buddy here,
Do you think he made the graphics for the Commodore 64 version, or maybe
That's
the Mac
version?
version?
Says on the lines. So, according to what I've read on the internet, I wasn't there, but that's what I've read. So, what other games have you written for other consoles? And dig Michael Garber's history here. 5 to 6 games for cell phones. I wouldn't be interested in those myself. Adam's Family for the TurboGrafx 16. Oh, the CD, 1991. Beyond Dark Castle, C64, 89. Oh, cool. Duck Dodgers in the Marvin missions. I was all set to say Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century.
Yeah, that's right.
In the Marvin missions. I'm going to blow up the earth. That Marvin?
That's pretty good.
Marvin Martian. That sounded more like Kermit the Frog, but never mind. SNES, 1993. Jamit, Street Basketball for the Super Nintendo as well. 94. Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally for the same console. 93. TAC Heroes, Big Red One for the DS, 2010, and Yo Bro, I'm sure he didn't pick the title, TurboGrafx 1691. So he has written a lot of games. Adam asks him, what attracted you to create a homebrew game for the Bally Astrocade? The Bally was my favorite console as a kid. My friend and I used to mess around with the Astrocade basic cartridge. We typed in the LT program, that stands for Little Terrestrial, and that was inspiration for making our own games. I was originally going to do a homebrew on the Vectrex, but once I discovered all the resources on Bally Alley, that's Adam's website, I decided I wanted to try a real Bally game. Well, that's cool. I didn't know that either. That, he saw your website and went, hey, now I can do this.
That's cool. I forgot about that. You even said that.
The sort of thing you were kind of hoping for. One of them.
When I first started Bally Alley, I just wanted to get information out there because there was nothing really out there except for a few places, and there still really isn't that much information out there.
So that's really cool. Obviously, we will be talking about war at another time.
Well, we probably would have done it first, but Chris is so terrible at video games, and any game that's versus 2-player against each other,
Adam just gets confused because when he looks at my score, it looks like a telephone number. So he doesn't realize that it's actually a video game score. I
was mentioning to Chris that I have, I think I have like 55 different versions of Crazy Climber, because maybe not that many. I think Crazy Climber, the release version, is officially like version 54F.
Oh, you mean prototype versions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's that many different, they weren't prototypes, they were just works in progress.
Early versions or whatever.
Yeah. The only real prototype I would say that exists is one that was sent off to Doug, the guy from Nice and Games. I sent him one, and that would be probably considered a prototype because it was, it's on an EEPROM. It's not the final version.
Right.
So he has something special there. Kind of, if you're into that kind of stuff.
If you guys haven't seen Nice and Games, it's a really cool, really funny YouTube channel. That's all. Just go to Nice and Games. I still don't know what he means by that.
It's actually worth visiting. He does a review of Crazy Climber too, which is kind of interesting.
A lot of Astrocade games on there. Adam keeps putting them in the show notes. I'm not sure if we've ever actually vocally mentioned the channel. I don't think we have. It's really good. It's, very, very well done.
Yeah, I wish you'd make some more.
Yeah.
Doug, go to town, make some more.
Stop with the Christmas videos already.
So one of the most fun parts of making this manual for me actually was writing the background. I'm not going to read the whole thing. If you want to read it, it's available online. You can do that. It's the funniest manual you will ever read in your entire life. No one's ever written a better manual. The descriptions, they make your...
I don't remember helping you with it.
That's why it's so good. But it's something I was fascinated by the idea of Crazy Climber, the game, because I didn't know much about it. I'd never played it when I was growing up. I'd never seen it in the arcade. So I visited with Mess, and I have a twin stick controller, an X-Arcade setup.
Thing is awesome.
Yeah, it works really good, and that's how the original game plays. You have two controllers, so you press up with your left controller, and that's like reaching up with your left hand. You press down with your right controller, and it's like reaching down. So you kind of move back and forth with the controller moving up and down, and that's how you move. So when I was doing a little bit of background checking, because like I said, I got interested in like just the climbing aspect of this, and I do remember in the early 80s, I was living in Connecticut at the time, and I remember hearing about this guy in, I want to say Chicago, or maybe it was New York, and how he climbed up the side of a building and they called him Spider-Man. So I looked him up on the internet, and I guess there's quite a few people who have done this over the years. But there was one man in particular, I don't have it noted down here who it was, but one of the things he did to practice for climbing up a building was to do pull-ups with one finger. And I don't know how that's possible, but I worked that into the story background, and to me that's like a highlight. And whenever I think of this game, I think of a guy with one finger like pulling himself up onto a ledge. And he said, whoever this person was, he was describing like sometimes you have to use like just the very tip of your finger and pull up your entire weight with one hand. And there's nothing to stop these people. They're not being held up from a rope from above.
Right.
You know, they're not on belay. They're trying to kill themselves, I think.
I've never felt the need to be reminded of my own mortality. But that poor guy, what none of them know is that I'm actually Spider-Man.
So first what we did here is we played the original last week, and we played it with one joystick. And then I hooked it up under under MAME, with MAME now. By the way, this ROM image is freely distributable, so you can download it from BallyAlley.com and anywhere else that also is probably hosting it by now. So thank you to Michael Garber for making that and War freely distributable, and not just making it a cartridge and frowning on other people playing it. He wanted as many people to play it as I guess he could, and I think that's great.
I like that.
Yeah, he had realistic expectations, like, he knew he'd be able to sell some cartridges, and he was happy that he did, and it worked out in that way. But I think he really wanted people to play the game, and it was an experience for him. It was a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I always wondered about that. People keep the ROMs to themselves, and
so we ended up playing both these versions we played one version of the game, but we played I guess we should back up here a second. Crazy Climber supports one joystick, or you can control it with two joysticks, and I think that's great because if you've ever played the arcade game, and you want to try it on the home console, I don't think there is another version that controls with two players, except for maybe the PlayStation versions or something like that were released like I think only in Japan. I think it was. So Chris played the two-player version the two joystick version last week, and I played the one controller version last week. Mm-hmm. And I also played it a little bit during the week because this happens to be the High Score Club game that's going to be ending this Sunday. You won't be able to hear it to play for this round, but you should play it anyway because if you have a chance, I think this is a really fun game.
It's very, very close to the arcade version for me in that the controls I find needlessly complicated. This is probably because I just have not gotten used to them yet. But you can't just move over to dodge something, which we'll get into in a bit. You have to make sure that both hands are where you need them. But when I watch you play, you seem to have an easier time with it.
Yeah, I'm just used to it. If you're playing with one controller, it does take a moment to get used to the controls. The manual that describes it, I actually made a drawing in the manual for it so you could sort of wrap your head around it a little easier. And I'm not going to lie to you, it does take a little bit to get used to. However, there's a lot going on. Like the arcade
game, I want to qualify it. Like the arcade game, it's exactly, because we just played it in MAME as well to compare. The controls are exactly the same.
That when you play with two controllers.
Right. So I was using your awesome X Arcade controller with both joysticks, and you have to do it like you would be climbing a building in real life instead of playing a video game. One hand
reach up
forward,
with one joystick.
One back, do pull-ups with your fingers or whatever. It's very close. I just have such a hard time getting used to it.
You want to climb to the top of a 400-story building, or maybe it's 300 stories. 200
according
stories?
to that.
Well, hell, you're trying to climb to the top of a building.
That's 200 stories high, which means the title of the game is perfectly accurate. He is crazy.
He is.
I mean, a 200-story building, you know that they have an easier way. Inside the building, they got to have elevators, they got to have stairs, But this building is inhabited by a whole bunch of identical bald people who throw flower pots down on them that look like huge badminton birdies.
On the first level, they throw flower pots down, yeah.
And they fall far too fast for the first level. But there are only 4 buildings in the entire game. Does it wrap to the first building, or do you just win?
Do you think I've played that far?
You might have. You play tested it for quite a while.
No.
You're pretty good.
The only way I was able to get further into the game was when I would cheat. So I could use save states.
Yeah, so we don't know. It must go back to the first building. I mean, especially if he was trying to emulate, dictionary definition, the arcade game. I mean, this was a 1980 Nichibutsu game, and that company also licensed to Sega Gremlin, Moon Cresta, Moon Shuttle, which is a favorite of ours on the Commodore 64.
Yeah. I think it's better on the Commodore 64 than it is in the arcade.
I agree.
So as you're moving up, or as you're climbing this building, there's windows that are opening and closing. The building, like we said, is 200 stories high, and there are 6 windows across. You can climb all the way from one side of the building to the other, and you can see, I think, about 10 stories at a time or something like that. And you start off at we're close to the very bottom, like 2 or 3 stories up, not on the ground. Otherwise, I would just walk away. I wouldn't even start climbing up. I'd press right, go off the screen, crash the game, and that'd be that. And I'd be like, Michael, you didn't even think of that.
I'll get my flowers down here.
So the windows open and close. I guess there's people who get really hot inside or really cold. I don't know what month it is right now. Right now, we're in New Mexico, and it was 101 degrees today. So if it's anything like that, they're opening the windows.
Now, some sections of the building are much more narrow, though. They're probably only 2 columns or windows across.
Well, the building's the same width the whole way across, but some places you only can climb up on the window ledges, and so in some places the window ledges are only 2 across.
Okay, but the whole building's there. You just
the whole building is there.
Get to the center.
You can't actually climb all parts of the building. You only can climb because you only can reach. Like in real life, if there's no windows, how can you climb a building if there's no ledges, right?
Well, if you're not Spider-Man anyway. Definitely. And we should mention this. As you climb the building, it scrolls vertically. So you don't see the whole building at once on the screen.
So as you're climbing the building, you'll eventually start to see these people who will stick their heads out and they start dropping flower pots on you on the first level. And if you're holding on with both hands, these flower pots can hit you on the Astrocade version, and it doesn't affect you whatsoever. It doesn't knock your hand free like is what happens. Like if you are reaching up and a flower pot hits your hand that's above your head in the arcade version of the game, it knocks that hand loose and you're only holding on with one hand. So if you get hit again, you'd fall. So you have to quickly reach the ledge again. This does not happen in the Astrocade version. If you're holding on with both hands and you get bopped with a flower pot or bird excrement or a dumbbell on the second level or falling bottles on the second level, you won't fall so easily.
You don't actually see the bird in this version, but you can tell he's there, believe me.
So as you're climbing up, you don't get to see the bird. There's a couple things that are omitted from the game because this game is an 8K cartridge. It's the largest game you can have on the Astrocade.
No bank switching necessary.
Yeah, no bank switching is needed. So you don't get to see the bird. You don't get to see, I don't know if it's called King Kong, but it's a giant ape that reaches and can grab for you in the arcade version. That's not there.
Besides the bird and the big monkey, he had to leave out the helicopter at the top of the building, but that's just extra gamical stuff. That's like almost an intermission.
That is actually the only part that I actually missed, because when you get to the top, there's a helicopter in the arcade version of the game, and it slowly goes up and down, and you have to touch its bottom, the bottom of it, and grab onto it, and then it takes you and pulls you away. In the Astrocade version of the game, you just reach the top of the building, and that's that. Sometimes in the arcade version, the helicopter doesn't cooperate with you, and it's really hard. You have to end up climbing down a few levels, move over right or left, and then get into a position where you can grab on. And you can get killed while this is happening because you've got windows open and closing on you, and if you climb down too far, people can drop something on you, so you can get to the top and get killed.
Yeah, we didn't talk about what the King Kong type does. He just flips back and forth.
Yes, and he's moving his arms out and he's grabbing toward the windows, and you have to avoid his arms. We didn't even mention this. And when you're playing with one controller, you have to use the button, and that makes every direction you press. It allows you to grab onto 2 ledges much easier. Out of the 2 homebrew games that Michael Garber has released, I actually prefer War. It's not that I don't like Crazy Climber. I think Crazy Climber is a fantastic game. War, however, is more action-packed. Crazy Climber is kind of repetitive. You're just climbing and using, unless you're playing with 2 controllers in which there's more variety of movement, you're basically pushing up on the controller then down in the repetitive movements. And there's more to it than that, but very often that's what you're doing. With 2 controllers, it just feels like you're a lot more involved, you know?
Well, it feels like you're climbing.
It does. It's very similar. It's very similar to really climbing. I mean, because I've climbed a lot of buildings, and I would know. So the one little anecdote I guess I should like to mention is Well, we're playtesting.
Anecdote. That could be like an Atari story. I like it.
I can't talk. Okay. One story I'd like to talk about this game for playtesting purposes was that Nice and Games guy, when he was playing the game, I sent him off the cartridge to try, and he had nearly a finished version of the game, and we thought it was the released version. We thought this game is done, or I thought it was. I hadn't run into any problems. Doug gets back to me in an email one day saying something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm getting stuck on the side of the building." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I tried getting stuck on the side of the building, couldn't do it. Was playing fine for me. We're playing the exact same thing, same hardware, both on real machines. So I said, "Describe to me exactly what you're doing." So he described to me exactly what he was doing, and I followed it to the letter, and I got stuck on the side of the building. And I'm like, wow. So I passed this information along to Michael, and he fixed it. He realized what the problem was pretty quickly, actually. Because he programmed the game, he knew what to do, and it was fixed, I think, that day. But it just goes to show how, like, you can play. And I was playing the game a lot, and I hadn't gotten stuck. And it's mostly because I don't get near the sides of the building.
Right.
I don't know why. I just don't. I just stay in the middle typically. And but I guess I'm not a good playtester. So thanks, Doug.
Should we talk about the artwork on the manual and the cartridge and the box? Who illustrated this?
It was done by a friend of mine, Paul Baptiste Baca. He is an actual paid illustrator, but of course, out of his goodness of his heart, he did this for free. It's a picture of a guy hanging from a ledge as a flower pot coming down to look about like it's about to hit him, but it misses him. Neat thing about this is actually the building he works at. So this is actually in Albuquerque. This is a real place.
Did you just ask him one day?
Yeah, you know Paul.
I do know Paul. It's the Baptiste that threw me off.
Yeah.
Is it his middle name? I guess that's the name he uses as an illustrator.
No, that's actually his full name. His first name is Paul Baptiste. It's hyphenated, yeah. So the artwork for the game is the same on... This is one of the... There are no games on the Astrocade that have... Well, I guess I take that back. There's no games on the Astrocade that have color artwork on the cartridge. This one has color artwork. It's got the same picture that's on the manual and the box, which is a DVD case.
And this has nothing to do with the arcade art, you said?
Yeah, that's not based on that at all. It's his own...
The perspective is interesting. We're looking down on the guy. So he's clinging to a windowsill. It's cool artwork. I like how it's cartoony and yet not cheesy.
Yeah, it's one thing about homebrews that I like is that not all of them, but many of them have some really great artwork. And this is some of my favorite artwork on the Astrocade. So the one last thing about Crazy Climber I should mention is just at the beginning of June, or maybe it was the end of May, I asked Michael Garber, the programmer of the game, if it would be okay for me to release the source code for War and Crazy Climber.
Crazy Crime, I want to play that game.
He said I could release the code for Crazy Climber. And War, he said, more than he wasn't proud of it, he said it does things that it shouldn't have done. So that one's not going to be released, but at the beginning of July, I finally got that into a state where I could upload it, and it's got some additional files with it. You can check it out, and you can compile the code, or not compile, I guess you can assemble the code, and you can have the working ROM. And if you wanted to, you can see how it works. You could modify it, I guess, if you wanted to do that. It's an 8K ROM. It uses up pretty much all of the memory and all of ROM, so you're not going to be able to change too much unless you take things out, I suppose.
And this is Z80 assembly, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's right. And it assembles with a assembler called ZMAC, and we'll leave it at that. So another game we played this past couple of weeks has been a basic game. It's called Missile Defense. And it's by Don Gladden.
It's basic in both respects. It's a very simple game, and it's written in the language Astrobasic.
Correct. It won't run in Bally Basic. So this is a Missile Command clone, or not even a clone, sort of a derivative of it.
It starts out looking like Missile Command a great deal. It winds up being kind of a pensive kaboom. You're really
wow, I never would have thought of that.
You're stopping things from getting by you, right? But
yes.
One at a time. Unless when you get farther in the game, there are two missiles at a time.
No, just one missile at a time. And it comes down quite slowly, too. So missile defense, besides being programmed by Don Gladden, it's actually released through his little company. It was called New Image. He released quite a few tapes that way. This was not a type-in game, by the way. It was released, the game, I think first was $5, and then I think later on he was selling his games for $8.95 each, which is still a bargain because each tape came with two games, one game on the front, one game on the back. And in this game it says, save your city. You use your joystick to place 3 block barriers in front of an oncoming missile. Now the block barriers stop the missile from coming down. You're not trying to blow them up like in Missile Command, right?
Right, you just place your barrier and then you take control of your second one just in case you missed with the first one, and you get 3 chances to stop the missile when it hits the bottom of the screen, which is where your screen-wide city stands. Kaboom.
So the way this game works is the scoring is pretty interesting. I didn't even realize it till I reread this manual this evening, because I was scoring. Here's how it works. The first level is basically 0 to 1,000 points. Second level is over 1,000 points to 2,000, and then the highest level is 2,000 points and above. On the first level, the missile moves pretty slowly. The second level, it moves every other pixel, so they widen your barrier. The third level, they actually end up, Don decided to skip 2 pixels, so now the missile's moving even faster. And I find it's moving a little too fast, and I can only blow up maybe 1 or 2 of those missiles before I lose. And it takes a while to get there, or it was taking me a while to get there, because I was putting out one of these block barriers and then just letting the missile that was coming down hit it. And when that was happening, I would get 100 points. And I was like, cool. Well, it turns out that's the lowest possible score you can get for blowing up a missile. I was like, I just thought that was the score you get. What you want to do is you want to use all 3 of your block barriers and put them out as quickly as you can as soon as the missile appears on the screen. The sooner you put them out there, the more points you can get for blowing it up. And I've gotten up to 480 points for blowing up one of them, which is a lot. The programmer decided, hey, if you can judge where that thing's going to be and put it out right away, we should reward you for that. But once you press on the Astrocade, it's not a fire button, it's the trigger button. Once you press that button, you place your barrier. However, if you happen to pass that barrier while you place the second one, you erase the one you just placed, and you don't get another one back. So don't go near your barriers once you've placed them. There may be a bug in the game, or maybe this is the way the game was programmed. I thought it was something I was going to be able to take advantage of and really score a very high amount of points. So I was playing the game this afternoon, and if you blow up the missiles, I guess you don't blow them, you block the missile, and when you block the missile, it blows up. And if you do it toward the bottom of the screen, it blows up your city, and all of your buildings get erased. And not all of them, but I'd say about 1/10 of the buildings get erased that are on your screen, and they don't get redrawn. So the next missile starts coming down, and you can let it hit that area now where the buildings have been demolished, and nothing happens. You don't lose.
From having written a few games in my day, what I'm assuming is that it was a bug initially. He did not mean for that to happen, but when he was playtesting the game, he saw the "Yay, I win" explosion wiping out part of the city. He thought, you know what, I'll keep that.
Well, what's neat about these Astrocade games is not like there's any copy protection. They're written in BASIC. You can halt the program while it's running, and you can look at the code. It's just right there sitting in front of you. If you wanted to find out what the heck it's doing, it's not that much to look at. And you could figure it out for yourself, which is pretty neat. And there's actually programs that will let you take the code and look at it in ASCII format on the PC. So that's pretty neat. So about maybe the final thing I want to bring up in this game, and I think it's a cute little gimmick, is that you can leave your initials. It's not a big deal. It's not an arcade game. You shut it off. They get lost. But once the high score for the day, it starts out, I think it's 1,000. If you beat 1,000, you get a little tone. And then you can enter initials from the hand controller. You move A through Z to get, and you move the knob A, and it'll give you the letters A through Z. You press the trigger, it advances to the next one. I wish there was a space available, but there's no space. So you have to use all 3 letters.
All right, we're pleased to be talking, finally, to Paul Thacker, the third host of the Bally Alley Astrocast. And he and Adam, mainly, because they're the smart ones, are going to be discussing JS&A.
Well, we're actually going to discuss the first ad for the Bally Astrocade, or excuse me, the Bally Home Computer. It came out in the September 1977 issue of Scientific American. And Paul is going to do some further research, I guess, in additional episodes, and talk maybe about what went wrong later on. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, I've already been reading up a little on that. So, JS&A was a pretty interesting company.
Yeah, I was looking today and I noticed that Joseph Sugarman, I guess the JS and JS&A, wrote at least 4 books, and one of them is just on his company, JS&A. It was called...
All about me.
It was called Success Forces, and he published it in 1980.
So what do you guys think the A stands for? Is it like DNA?
It's Joe Sugarman and Associates.
So let me get started with this ad. I don't know if the ad was originally in black and white or if it was in color. The same exact ad was printed in a catalog, their very first catalog, number 1.
So JS&A didn't do anything prior to this?
They did, but they only did through advertisements. In fact, they talk about it in this very ad on the front page, which you didn't read. They talk about how they're going to have a catalog for the first time. I guess they started in the early 70s selling calculators. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, I don't know if a calculator was the very first thing, but yeah, they printed big ads in like Scientific America and magazines like that, and really focused on electronics, and they're really pretty unique in selling very expensive, fancy electronic devices directly to consumers. So I read about actually a little bit before this, and
so they were expressly a mail order distribution company, right? You wouldn't see JS&A products in the store. They didn't actually devise.
Yeah, so
anything.
they didn't make them. They more marketed them.
Okay,
so
I see.
Yeah, so actually in the May 1977 issue of Scientific America, they sold the Bally Fireball pinball machine.
Oh, I'd like to see that ad. You should send me a link to that. Yeah.
So that was, really, as far as I know, the first time someone had tried to market a pinball machine directly to home buyers instead of to arcades and places like that.
Right. Yeah.
I'll be damned. Full size?
No, it wasn't full size. It was like 3/4 size or something. I've seen pictures of it, but I've not seen an ad for it, actually. Especially not by JS&A. I didn't know. So that's probably how they must have gotten their foot in the door with Bally in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But you kind of see some similarities in how they market it, because they spend a lot of time going over like why you should trust them to buy such an expensive device through the mail, because I think that's kind of a big hurdle to get over.
The product, we haven't gotten to the ad too much yet, but I'm going to tell you, the listeners that is, how it they end up is they give you a 30-day period where you can send it back, no questions asked. Unfortunately, I think for them, pretty much everyone probably wanted to send their unit back because it was overheating, but we can get into that another time. I'd like to start out just by telling the big bold print here, the Home Library Computer. They don't actually say in the big print Bally, but they say it shortly thereafter. It says it's a teaching device, an arcade game, a musical instrument, and a home computer. The Bally Library Computer provides more entertainment and services than man has ever dreamed possible from a single consumer product.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Don't you need one?
Yeah, and I feel like we're probably going to spend some time making fun of their hype, but it is worth noting that this is really the dawn of home computing.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So this...
Well, that's the function of every ad, though. I mean, ads have this kind of hyperbole. What throws us, I think, is that there's so much text, it looks like an article. Adam and I were just talking about this, how it probably is deliberately meant to look like the actual magazine writers had written this article about this astonishing new device. As a matter of fact, the JS&A copy toward the end of this ad refers to it as an article. It says, if you're not satisfied with, whatever that you've read in this article.
Something that's worth noting, too, is I was trying to find the actual magazine for this, and if anyone's interested, you can actually go to scientificamerican.com and buy every single one of their back issues going all the way back until $19.09, and then before that, all of them are free. And each issue is, I think there was $7.99 or $6.99 each. And in this particular version, this issue, they actually had paper copies available too, and those were $100. So if you need one, you can get it, apparently.
I'd love to read an 1800s issue of Scientific American.
They're on archive.org, all the ones from previously from 1909 to 1845.
You no longer have to churn your own butter. I don't know.
So, Paul, why don't you read this? Do you have the article in front of you? Or, excuse me, see, even I'm calling it an article, and it's not an article. This ad. Do you have the ad in front of you?
Yeah.
Could you read the first paragraph, which is really just one sentence? But before you read it, I want to give you some background. When I was looking at, for some information about JS&A today, I found an ad that kind of talked with them briefly, and they mentioned this exact paragraph as something that they said that was over the top. So why don't you go ahead and read it?
All right. This is the story of an incredible product. So incredible that we know of no future consumer product that will have such a far-reaching technological impact on society.
Well, I feel like in the background I should be going, oh.
Hey, you're doing it now.
In a world, yeah.
You know, which in fairness, if you replaced Bally Library Computer with computers, might be true.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So then they go on and they compare it to the IBM 5100 computer, which came out in 75, and they said it costs about $10,000, and I looked that up, and it's approximately right. It costs about $9,000, and then it came with BASIC, and it was...
Yeah, at some point I want to give some historical prices to kind of give a little context to this.
Yeah. So then they go on and talk about the calculator here, and they say how you don't have to use paper tape. It'll print the answers right on your screen, and you can go backwards up to, I think it says 10 memories, it calls them.
Right on your very own television.
Right.
I guess you did have to tell people that in 1977.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't Pong.
Well, it's also neat that you could hook it up to your TV, and you didn't have to have a monitor. They don't mention that actually in here even once, but thinking back... like the
monitors are expensive.
Yeah, they sure were. So this is a better way to do it, from a price perspective anyway, not exactly from how good it looks on your screen, but
yeah. Although they did say it had higher resolution than something like the Atari. So.
You're right. Yeah, they don't say it by name, but they call them they keep comparing this unit over and over to the TV games of the time.
And they must have meant that dedicated consoles, like Pong, in other words.
Yeah.
So, Paul, JS&A is not still around, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, Joe Sugarman still does marketing, but I think JS&A dissolved quite some time ago.
Yeah. What in this article do you want to cover directly? Is there something you'd like to talk about next?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how they described its technical capabilities. So one thing I thought was interesting was, when they said it had 12,000 bytes of computer power.
Oh, yeah, we caught that too.
Yeah,
that's it's an odd way of describing it because they're just literally adding together the amount of ROM and the amount of RAM that it has.
Right.
Yeah.
Which aren't even, it has a 4K RAM and 8K ROM, so, those aren't really the same thing.
But they are computing power. You have to remember that.
Yeah.
Well, they're not the only ones guilty of that. Coleco did that when they marketed their Atom computer. They said it had 80K of RAM or ROM or something like that. I don't know if you remember that, but...
or even like the Nintendo 64, really.
Speaking of the N64, I'm going to tell a little story. My nephew Joseph last night, we were playing a couple of video games I have set up here in my office area, and we were playing Mario 64. Before I was setting that up, as I was setting up, I said, why don't you try playing Crazy Climber since we reviewed it this episode? And he tried it, got a little confused, and I wanted to show him how the controller works, so I thought playing one of the built-in games would be a pretty good use for that. So we played Gunfight with each other, and we ended up playing it. I'd say we played it for 45 minutes last night, probably played it for 45 minutes today, which is longer than I've ever played it before.
He loved it, right?
Yeah, he absolutely, positively loved it. And he's 13. I don't know what he's doing loving Gunfight.
You showed him The Incredible Wizard.
I have not, yeah.
He can't handle that yet.
Yeah, that'll blow his mind.
He'll cry when I start shooting him. But it was an accident.
Right.
It's the controller's fault. But like a natural, he did start blaming the controller for problems when he was like he'd miss me or I shoot him. He's like, oh, this controller. Oh, although I do have to say twice. It's happened once to him and once to me. And I have to ask Chris and I have to ask you, Paul. Has this ever happened to you? While you're playing Gunfight, if you played it this much, maybe it happens to everybody, we stopped being able to move our guys.
Huh.
We weren't out of bullets, and then the other person would still be able to move. They'd shoot you, and that would reset, and you'd start moving again.
Weird.
Yeah, don't remember.
It ran out of computing power.
Yeah, it ran out of those 12,000 bytes of power. Right. So let's see. Up next, we have a computer in every home. They talk about the internal task library, which are referring to the internal ROM subroutines, which is kind of neat. They don't call it that ever, but they do make mention of it.
Yeah, it's not a dumb computer like those others.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's neat that they never actually point to any other. Maybe they thought they'd get in trouble, but they never name another company at all. I don't think, do they?
Well, IBM.
IBM, okay, they do name IBM.
So we get a timeline here. This came out in the September 77 issue of Scientific American, which means it was probably sent to them, what do you think, July?
Probably earlier than that, probably 4 to 5 months earlier.
So which programmable consoles do they have to compete with?
What I wrote down was the Atari, which released September 11th, 77.
Oh, I didn't know that date. Really?
Okay.
Yeah, so that was right around this time.
They talk about burn-in, which was kind of a big problem when the Pong systems came out, and they had burn-in on the television screens. And they compare this system, which you can leave on, and you don't have to worry about that happening. They never call it burn-in by name, but they say, this is, well, can I read this? Would you mind if I read, or Chris, why don't you read this? Save for your TV.
So you want me to handle this, huh?
If you can.
The task library includes a built-in electronic timer, which determines the end of a game or program by either score or elapsed time. It also times the arcade games and automatically turns off your unit and blanks out your screen if it's left on too long. Most TV set manufacturers have excluded sets that use TV games from warranty coverage because of the possible lines that appear on the screen from sets left on too long with the same picture. This is impossible with the Bally.
Do you want to compare the prices to other things you'd get at that time?
Yeah, if we want to, yeah, because here they talk about that this unit was going to cost $300. Well, they don't actually tell you to the very end. It's like one of the very last things they talk about is the price.
Of course.
They bring it up at the end and they say it's like $299.95. It's going to have a 90-day labor warranty and a 1-year parts warranty. Later, we'll get into this when we start covering JS&A in more detail, but that really came back to bite them. The other thing that this article talks about, in which the Arcadian makes a lot of mentions of, is that they don't call it the add under here, but they do talk about the expansion that you can buy, well, within 6 months, which was going to cost $300. It was going to have a dual magnetic tape deck, a keyboard, which doesn't say it was going to be QWERTY, it calls it alphanumeric. It was going to have more RAM, so I think it says 16K somewhere, 16,000 bytes.
Yeah, so it would bring it up to a total of 20K of RAM and 24K of ROM.
Yeah. For,
about $600 total.
Yeah. In an upcoming letter that I'll be reading this episode, I mentioned how they write a letter to the consumer who got their product, and they're asking them whether or not they want to continue waiting for the add under, or if they want to get another computer from JS&A. And I don't know, Paul, do you know of another computer they ended up selling? Because apparently, at least in the letters that they wrote to the Bally users who bought their Ballys, some of them had gotten them, some of them hadn't. They said that they were going to be dropping the Bally and they were going to be selling some other unit, but they don't mention who this national known company is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't know what JS&A sold. What I was kind of looking up was like what other computers you could buy at this point, which was not a lot. Like, they of course like to compare it to the IBM 5100, which that came out September 1975. And the very cheapest version you could get was $8,975. Yeah. Which in today's dollars would be $35,580.
Woo!
So, wow.
And
a car.
Yeah, I saw a picture of it today, and I showed it to Chris as well, and it had like these giant cassette cartridges type things. Do you know what those were?
Like magnetic tape?
Yeah. Did you see a picture of it?
Yeah, I saw one on Wikipedia, but I didn't look at it.
Yeah, that's probably the same one I saw.
Drives. Yeah, so it had a 1.9 megahertz Palm processor, and in the cheapest version, 16 kilobytes of RAM and 32 kilobytes of ROM. So, it's actually, the expanded Home Library Computer would have compared pretty well to that, for especially considering the dramatic price difference just 2 years later.
Right. So what other computers were available at the time? Was the Commodore PET out yet?
I'm not sure. The two I looked up were the Apple II you could get at this point. That came out June 10th, 1977. That was $1,298, which would be over $5,000 factoring in inflation.
Well, I do know that, I hate to interrupt you, Paul, that the PET 2001, as they called it, did come out before any Apples.
Oh, it did? Okay.
That was a point of pride with Commodore, that the first actual personal computer was a Commodore PET.
Okay. So
there was one other computer I wanted to mention. That's probably the most closely comparable in price would be the TRS-80, which was sold by Radio Shack. Yeah. So that came out August 3rd, 1977. And if you got just the computer, you could get it for $399, which would be about $1,500 with inflation. If you got it with the 12-inch monitor and the tape storage, then it was $599.
Yeah.
So that kind of shows you how expensive a monitor could be.
And the monitor was black and white too, I think, right? Because
I think that's right.
The Model 1 only could display black and white, I think. I've never been a fan of Radio Shack computers, not the Cocos, not... That's because the Bally is the best computer there ever was.
Yeah, well, look at those thousands of bytes of power.
Right.
Why did they just break it down to hundreds of thousands of bits to look really impressive, you know?
Yeah, bigger numbers.
No, we can't blame JS&A necessarily for exaggerating stuff, because we don't know what Bally told Sugarman about the product, or maybe what Bally planned, because the unit hadn't been shipped yet.
Right.
Most of what they talk about here, it wasn't total vaporware. Like, they at the very least had prototypes they were developing. You know, they had an ad under that, you know, was functional, and, you know, you could hook up a line pin to the system. Yeah. You know, even the modem, I don't know if Bally ever developed a modem, but, you know, Perkins Engineering did eventually sell a modem, so.
Right. But that required their Blu-ram unit to work with it. But it did work. You know, it did come out.
They did talk about how reliable it was going to be.
Oh, they do.
Quote, hermetically sealed and pre-tested for a lifetime of service.
That cracked me up. Hermetically sealed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which, you know, I mean, JS&A were the marketers, so it was kind of Bally's responsibility to make the product actually function.
In the one of the letters that Joseph Sugarman writes to the people who bought the Bally or were waiting for their Bally unit still, and one of these letters came out in October, and he was sending these letters. This is in September, and the following year in October. So we're talking 13 months later. Some people, I don't know if they ordered them, but if let's just say the people who ordered them in September, if anyone ordered them from this ad, called up right away and said, I want this, they probably got their units first, I imagine. I don't know for sure, but hopefully they did it in that order, you know. So let's say maybe if you ordered it in the spring and everyone else had already gotten their orders then, so then you were put on another list because there was another delay once the unit started being shipped back because they were overheating.
Oh.
So one thing they talk about with their services, it says, the Bally computer is also self-diagnostic. We have developed a cartridge that lets the unit itself check every integrated circuit and every solid-state component, and which displays any malfunction on your TV screen. Which, of course, if your computer's not working, it ain't going to display anything to your TV screen, is it?
Yeah.
That was going to be something they were going to ship for free to their customers who bought right away. Which, I don't know, do you think they were talking about the unit that eventually Richard Belton sold?
Do they mean a device like that, or just a cartridge like they use during manufacturing?
They call it a cartridge, but
you know, because there is a cartridge that, you know, that it's been dumped, a diagnostic cartridge.
But that's just that's just like test your hand controls and stuff, right? It doesn't test RAM or anything, does it?
Don't remember.
No, okay. Yeah,
so it's not one of the more exciting cartridges.
No, it's not. Not as good as this Bingo Math cartridge that they talk about earlier in the article.
Bingo Math.
Yeah, do you want to talk about Bingo Math a little?
Oh, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so that was programmed by Dick Ainsworth. We have an interview with him on the site, and I know he liked to talk about how it was, you know, pretty revolutionary for actually having the adjustable difficulty. So, like, you know, it'd automatically get harder if you answered questions better, or get easier if you didn't do as well. Here, I've got a quote here. They commissioned me to create something that made it, the arcade, look like it's educational. Bingo Math was actually a revolution in program design, the first educational software ever sold, the first user modeling system, the first program to use interval timing, etc. These innovations led directly to my creation of the first typing tutor sold by Microsoft, IBM, etc." End quote.
And that's actually on Bally Alley, so that'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, I think we should look up sometime if that's actually correct, if it's the first educational software ever sold.
Yeah, I don't know if the Commodore PET had some PD software.
I think if I'm correct, isn't it Dick Ainsworth who was talking about how when the original Bally Basic tape that had was it Lunar Lander that was on there? Well, the one, there was a tape that shipped with Bally Basic when you bought the tape interface, and he said that he was at the recording studio with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates was getting the first version of Basic put onto a tape for some computer. I don't think it was the very first time, but it was one of those times. So do you know what I'm talking about, Paul?
That sounds familiar.
All right. This is why I want to learn to edit a little bit. This will be good.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So I think we've about covered the first ad. So Paul, can you tell us a little about what you think you might be able to cover in the next, maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be the next episode, or something you wanted to cover here?
Before we get off of Dick Ainsworth, I was going to read a little bit about how he described the system as a computer, because I think one of the things that's interesting reading the ad is they're really pushing the computer aspect.
They sure are, yeah.
And it sounds like Bally wasn't entirely sold on marketing it as a computer. So here's what Dick says. Bally is a strange contributor to the entire process of making computers available to people, as opposed to governments, corporations, and university. Bally was the world's expert at extracting quarters from adults via slot machines. When video games hit as coin-op systems, Bally Midway became equally expert in extracting quarters from children. They saw the Bally Arcade as simply a way of extracting lots of quarters all at once. Bally never understood what computers were or their potential impact of actually owning one. They refused to use the word computer in any of their advertising for the arcade because they thought it was too complicated. ... Had Bally gone ahead with the first, and quite simply the best, computer system of its time, using Tom's language, it could have been the computer that changed everything. Instead, Bally decided to open another casino in Atlantic City. The rest is, or actually isn't, history. And he goes on, I tried to explain to Bally the potential of what they had. I even went before the Bally Board of Directors with an extensive presentation showing that the ultimate game is learning to create games. I talked a lot about the incredible potential for people actually using the expanded Bally system for much more than a game box. The Bally execs listened patiently, but ultimately decided to stick with things they knew about. Their next major move was to drop the computer idea and build a new casino in Atlantic City.
Who is this Tom?
Tom DeFonte, mentioned here, he was designing the ad-under language ZGrass, which was going to be shipped with the unit. Yeah, I was going to bring that up after you finished reading.
Do you know about when JS&A and Bally parted ways, and Bally was not using JS&A to sell the console anymore?
By the end of 1978, they were already kind of calling it quits. They hadn't, I don't think, done it quite yet, but they were fed up already. And it was really clear in those letters that you'll hear later in this episode. They talk about how they wish they had, here's a for instance that they don't talk about in the ad. They make it seem like they had these. They said they're never again going to try to market something they've not used yet. So they wrote this ad without having used the unit. Right? So, I mean, they I guess,
yeah.
You know.
Like,
yeah, I mean, they kind of
people in
trusted Bally, I guess, because, they talk about how Bally is a, big electronics company, so I guess their claim is that you can trust Bally to make a reliable product.
Which is, it's a shame that it wasn't reliable, because it is a great product. It's just, it overheats.
And so we don't know particularly why JS&A said that's enough from Bally, or we know?
Oh, we kind of know, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
Right. I mean, so it wasn't only the overheating.
I think also because they really want to sell this as a complete computer system to the consumer, which meant the ad-under. And the ad-under, they didn't think was going to come out.
And not being able to provide enough units to meet their orders.
I see.
So, and plus I think maybe it originally was going to be exclusive, and obviously it went on to become sold in Montgomery wards, but I'm not sure if Bally let JS&A in on that before they started doing that. But I don't know that for sure. These are things we need to look into.
Is there anything else you wanted to add, Paul? Any other research you did that we didn't give you an opening for?
I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover today. Like Adam teased, I do want to get a little more into JS&A later on.
Right.
They actually had some congressional investigations about their sales practices. So that wasn't entirely about the Astrocade, but that was one thing that came up. So if you want to hear what Al Gore thought about Astrocade sales, then you will find out.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. I know you're going to be up for another few hours. You're a party animal. You're not fooling me. That's okay. All right.
Talk to you later, man.
Cool.
Okay, thanks.
Take it easy, Paul.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to the Arcadian segment. I'm going to be reviewing the Arcadian newsletter. The last couple of shows, I covered the pre-Arcadian newsletter called the Arcadians that ran for 5 issues. That wasn't really a newsletter per se, but it was a precursor to this, and that was distributed to about 35 different people by the end of those 5 issues. This newsletter eventually gets into the distribution of the thousands, but it starts off small, and at 8 pages each for these first couple of issues, it's working its way up, but it gets great. I think probably volumes 5 and 6, which occur quite a ways down the road after the re-release of the system. Those are probably my favorite issues. Rather than jumping right in and explaining a little bit about these issues and telling you the contents of what's in them, I wanted to break down for myself and for you guys what's going to be coming up, because I wanted to kind of wrap my head around how I'm going to be covering these newsletters. And since there's really 2 main newsletters, the Arcadian and Cursor, I had to come up with a method for kind of breaking down what I would be doing. So in this podcast, this episode, I'll be covering Arcadian 1 and 2, and up until podcast number, number 9, I'll be covering 2 issues each. By number 9, I will be covering the November 79 and December 79 issue of the Arcadian. Starting in podcast number 10, I'm only going to be covering 1 issue of the Arcadian per episode. That's because that's the same month, January 1980, that the first issue of Cursor comes out. So I'll start covering 2 newsletters still at the same time, but I'll cover Arcadian and Cursor. It is going to take some time before we get that far. I expect Astrocast number 10 to be released on or about October 21st. So we've got quite a few podcasts to get to before then, and we might as well get started now with issue number 1 of the Arcadian. Issue 1 of the Arcadian is actually still called the Arcadians, but it's not known as that for much longer. It was released November 6th, 1978. Bob Fabris, he wants to sort of let his users, or readers I guess, know who he is. So he says, since this is the premiere issue in the subscriber format, I thought a few words about myself would be in order. My interest in computer lies in the hobby home area. I worked for Lockheed Missiles and Space Corps, doing interface engineering, which is a $4 word for making sure things go together. As a ham operator, I have some knowledge of electronics and am self-taught in the area of computers. I certainly don't understand all I know, and am acting as a reporter in this Arcadian endeavor. One of the first pieces of information that Bob goes ahead and tells his audience is that the football cartridge is now going into production, and he says it takes 6 to 12 weeks for the chips to be produced, so they may be out by the holidays. However, it would seem to me that if it's going to take 12 weeks, they probably don't get out until 1979. So I always thought that was one of the earliest releases for the Bally, but and even the Bally FAQ, which I helped write, says it was released in 78. But we might have to update that to 79, or we could just leave it as it is. It's right in the range. The add-on will be on display at the Las Vegas Electronics Show in January. It is planned to have the unit working with disk memory and a printer at the show. What's interesting about that is in upcoming Arcadian issues, he will talk about that, and it is on display, and they do show it. What it turns out to be, though, is a sort of a mock-up that they take together right after the show, so it wasn't actually ready for production or anything like that, but I think they kind of made it look like it was. Now Bob lists a few desires by correspondence. I'm not going to read them all, but I am going to read some of them. they would like to be able to control their computer with, or I guess, yeah, it's a computer, sure. The Bally Arcade, they want to be able to control it with voice. They want to be able to attach a telephone modem to it, which eventually does happen. Some of his readers are interested in the TTY interface, which I don't think ever happened with it. They want to be able to do computer conferencing, which seems really early to be able to do something like that. They want to be able to direct connect a toy organ keyboard to it, which it's not an official project, but I know that in the Bob Fabris collection that I have, that there is at least one user who did that, and he actually wrote instructions on how to put it together. I guess he hoped that it would be published in the Arcadian, but it never was. I'm pretty sure I could put that on ballyalley.com, but maybe not. There's something called DirecTV entry, which I'm not sure what they even mean by that. They would like to be a chess game, which never was released, although one was supposedly in the works, and it's actually in some of the early catalogs for the released by Bally. People would like to be able to connect RS-232 devices to their Astrocade. These would be such devices as like printers, which that was released, but not by Bally. That was a third-party add-on. Interactive games, which there's many of them. Many of them are from the Arcadian. And also, the final thing on this list is word processing. And people did use their Bally Arcade for word processing. It's kind of amazing to think that some of those people didn't even have keyboards, which no one actually mentions here, but people pretty soon they start wanting to be able to interface their Bally Arcade to like an ASCII keyboard. That would be a QWERTY style, and it comes along pretty quickly, and quite a few people come up with pretty much the same technique, which is to interface it with the 300 baud interface, which is actually a serial input. And they use, at the time, I guess serial input keyboards were pretty common, and they used these devices in order to make them work with BASIC. That scheme doesn't really work so well with the later version of Bally Basic, which came out in '81, but by then there was actually some better methods anyway, such as the Blue RAM interface. Bob goes on to say, JS&A has not shipped any hardware lately. What has been shipped is a pair of letters to their mailing lists, one to owners of the BASIC unit and the other to those who are still waiting. A copy of each letter is enclosed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another segment that's going to follow this. It's going to cover these two letters in a little more detail rather than kind of put them in here with this segment on the Arcadian newsletter. I think it'd make a good segment all by itself, so I'm going to do that. Here we have Bob saying some of the projects that are known to be in the works. There's going to be a breakdown of the cassette interface circuit board and chip data so that people can understand how it works. And it's through that people are able to connect keyboards and things like that. Eventually that gets published in the Arcadian. People are working on half-size lettering on the screen. This eventually becomes a 3x5 character set. Craig Anderson designs it. And it's not really used by in the Arcadian. Craig Anderson does publish a 10, 15 page paper about it, but it's very slow to be used in BASIC. This character set is used, however, in ZGrass, and it works pretty well. And there's a couple of other cartridges that use it as well, like Blue RAM Basic makes use of the 3x5 character set, as well as the Machine Language Manager, which is the only cartridge that I can think of that actually doesn't require extra RAM to run that uses the 3x5 character set. Some other projects are the 3-voice music, so that you don't have to just hear one tone at a time. Effort to include decimal notation in the Tiny Basic, this Bally Basic here, which they sort of find some workarounds to do. It's not a very popular thing to do too much because mostly people write games in Bally Basic, or they don't really deal with decimals too much, and when they do, they find workarounds, but nothing too good, I would say, right away. And people are working on a readout of the cartridges. By that, I'm guessing they mean understanding how they work by doing a ROM dump, and there are people who do ROM dumps as early as 1978. I think they used some kind of Z80 computers that were running CP/M. And there's actually some people who sent in Bob quite early on ROM dumps of their cartridges, and people would examine them and figure out how they worked. So at this point, people have finally got their hands on BASIC, and they're trying to figure it out. As I talked about in the last issue, or in the last episode, they're trying to figure out what they can do with BASIC. And here we're going to be covering some of what we covered last time, so I'm going to just skim over this very, very quickly. People have figured out that there's an @ symbol, an ampersand symbol, and a % sign symbol. And the ampersand allows you to use an array. The % symbol is peek and poke, and the ampersand symbol lets you access the I/O ports. There's a very, very short program here, just about 7 lines, that gives you an example of how you can use these. Meanwhile, there's some questions that people have been writing into Bob, and he takes them and sort of makes a Q&A right here. People ask, can I add an IBM compatible floppy disk system? And the answer is not easily, not until the add-on's released. Well, the add-on never is released, so that never does occur. Although on BallyAlley.com there was a document that someone had made it so you could have a DOS connected to your Bally, and you could have I think it was some kind of CPM interface. I didn't quite understand it. I'll try to link to it in the show notes. Maybe some of you tech people can understand it better than me. People wondered, is it S100 compatible? It's not. Does the cassette come with the computer? By cassette here, they're talking about the Bally Basic cartridge, and it doesn't, and it's going to cost $49.95 if you don't have it. Plus, you got to get the 300 baud interface for another $49.95. Bob says that reminds him that in the last issue he was talking about how he was having difficulty making recordings with his recorder, and apparently Bally fixed that issue, and now that the 300 baud interfaces should work with, he says, 99% of recorders, which I'd say that's pretty accurate, because the 300 baud interface works pretty darn well and it's quite reliable. In fact, when we archive tapes that were written in the late 70s and early 80s are able to be archived not easily, but more easily than you might expect. I would say that the tapes are probably more reliable than discs for other systems that I've come across, which seem to lose their data much more easily. People ask if you can draw with the set command and print command, and he goes on to say that in Bally Basic there's line and box. People ask, can you write to tape with Tiny Basic? And his answer is a little confusing to me, because he says no, you only can access the tape through the input command, which is not accurate. You can, of course, write your programs out to tape using the :print command. So for the next part of the newsletter, he says, excerpts included herein identify some areas of research that any of us can do on our Tiny Basics. Try everything, and if you get different responses, let us know. Now here is where I am not going to cover what he covers in this issue, because he actually covered it, most of this information, in Arcadian's number 5. Here it's reprinted, and this is for the people who actually are subscribers now, rather than just the people he was communicating with, a small group of about 35 people, which really isn't actually a small group at all, is it? This is so he includes basically the entire letter that I read last time by Ernie Sams, which is pretty neat, because Ernie gave a lot of information on how to use Bally Basic and how to communicate with the I/O ports, and people will end up exploring that in later issues and come up with some neat little effects they are able to accomplish. So the final part here is actually called the data file. I also covered this in the last podcast because he included this 2 pages of information about the Bally unit in Arcadian's number 5, and he's covering it here again. And if you didn't read it last time in its entirety, maybe you should give it a chance now, because he prints it reprints it with good reason, because it's quite interesting to read, and it will definitely give you a great overview of the Bally if you're not familiar with it very much. So that about covers Arcadian number 1. Arcadian number 2 was released December 4th, 1978. He talks about some recent developments in the retail field. NCE CompuMart decided on December 1st to drop the Bally line. I find that interesting because that's only 4 years earlier than this newsletter was published. So unlike a magazine, which usually has a 3-month lead time, Bob is able to get the latest information into these newsletters. I guess that's kind of the point of a newsletter. You get information pretty quickly. Nowadays, of course, you don't have to worry about that so much. But at the time, this was probably the easiest, quickest, most efficient way to reach end users. So NCE is going to be able to fulfill their back orders, and they're going to continue to repair units. Now this next bit here is about JS&A. They no longer show the Bally in their catalog. It's December 1978. They first began shipping them almost a year earlier. BASIC only became available about 2 months before now, and they are not going to be selling it any longer. They say they expect to have their backlog substantially reduced by the end of the year, including repair. Paul Thacker and I are going to be covering JS&A in quite some detail over the next few podcasts, and it's pretty enlightening what we find out about them. In the last issue, Bob mentioned that some people were trying to get their Ballys to be able to produce 3-tone music from BASIC. And he says here, 3-tone music has been accomplished. I heard a tune just the other day and it is not so bad. At the moment, the sounds are created by direct access to the chip via machine language, but we are getting indications of how to do the same thing at the BASIC level. And he gives some details about how it works, which I'm not going to go over. So AstroBasic, which comes out in 1981, that's the version that has the built-in tape interface, has a method built into BASIC so that you can create 3-voice music much easier. Plus there's a program by George Moses, which was originally printed in the Arcadian, that is included in the AstroBasic manual that explains how to create music, and you can make your own little scores, which is how he released his own programs or his own music on tapes. So a 4-color screen is now available. That might not seem like much, since most people have heard that the Bally can create 256 colors. That's true and it's not true. A cartridge is able to easily show 8 colors on the screen without doing any tricks. You have to do some manipulating in machine language in order to do more colors than that, which I'm not going to get into here. And BASIC is limited to usually a foreground color and a background color. But by manipulating the horizontal color boundary, you can actually get 4 colors on the screen at once. You have to pay attention to what's going on, but it's pretty easy. You just have to use the ampersand and put in the color port, or excuse me, the port, not the color port, the horizontal color boundary port, and then you can still use the background color and foreground color in order to change the colors on the left and right sides of the screen. So you could have 2 different colors on one side and 2 different colors on the other side. He talks about how access to the internal calculator is available via BASIC using the $sign command. This is something that isn't used very much and is actually dropped from AstroBasic later on, which just makes, I think, 1 or 2 programs incompatible with AstroBasic. And those programs were actually rewritten and republished in the newsletter later on when the expanded BASICs came out, like BlueRAM BASIC and ViperSoft BASIC. Tiny BASIC has 2 additional commands not indicated in the manual: ABS, which produces the absolute value, and a stop statement, which stops your program. Now these are one of the few commands in BASIC where you actually have to type out the 4 letters for stop and the 3 letters for ABS. Bob says something that kind of is amusing to me. He says, I've had some interesting results with the call command, most not worthy of repeating, which means he's probably been crashing his computer by putting in calls to locations in the ROM, which he was just messing around, trying to come up with something interesting. What he does say here is, one of the most interesting was the display of the large game over printout that occurs in the game's portion. Now that is a key. For some reason, readers really grab onto this, and within an issue or 2, they're going to have figured out how to display the game over subroutine. First they do it sort of right, but it works, but it doesn't work as well as it could, and then people figure out how to do it easily. And then eventually people figure out how to come up with and use the subroutines built into the ROM so that they can print anything they want, not just game over. So it's a little bit, they learn slowly, but they have to figure it out. And if it wasn't for the Arcadian, these people wouldn't have been able to work together. And this never would have happened. Now there's 4 pages that are dedicated to an article that was originally printed in Computer Graphics Volume 12, Number 3, the August 1978 issue, on pages 33 to 37. The article is called Basic ZGrass, a sophisticated graphics language for the Bally Home Library Computer, by Tom DeFonte, Jay Fenton, and Nola Donato. I'm not going to go over this at all. In some future episode, probably quite a ways down the road, I'm going to cover ZGrass because I find it fascinating. It's not available to use anywhere. The ZGrass language has not been archived. in any way that I'm aware of. There's some documentation for it on how to use it on BallyAlley.com, but the language itself is not usable because it's not been dumped, which is unfortunate because it's got quite a history with the CGraph, and people used it to make some presentations at those art, I guess, events, conferences in the late 70s and early 80s. And I mentioned with Chris when we were talking at the beginning of this episode that Grass, the original language that ZGrass is based on, was used for Star Wars. So that's all that is gone. And it would be great if it could be archived. If you actually have an interest in hearing about the ZGrass language, let us know, and maybe I'll cover it a little earlier than I expect. Bob makes an announcement that executive software data is now available from me for $1. And it just covers printing and postage. This is of value only to those conversant with assembly language. It was developed by Tom Wood and provides internal locations of most of the data, subroutines, etc., that a programmer would find useful. This is like this little teeny tiny paragraph, and yet this becomes one of the most important and used documents that Arcadian readers have at the time. It gets republished. I don't know if Tom Wood gives the publisher of Cursor permission or not, but it gets republished and Tom Wood does not get any credit. Cursor also did the same thing with something that was very useful called the Peek and Poke Manual, which was written by Brett Bilbray. He also got no credit, which is a real shame because he did a lot of work in order to make that happen. Bob lists a portion of the ASCII code that is pertinent to the Bally here. Everyone pretty much knows what the ASCII code is. You can type it into Google. If you don't know what it is, you'll get a listing of what it refers to. From Bob, the Bally Service Manual, PA1, is available for just $1. He says it's not too detailed, but it does include a schematic, a parts list, and a parts layout. I actually like it quite a bit. Here's something that he lists kind of in passing. He says current pricing of video arcades is as follows, and he lists 6 or 7 games that sold for $19.95 each, a few games that sold for $24.95, and one cartridge, not basic, that was going to be selling for $49.95. He doesn't actually give any titles, he only gives their part numbers, which got me curious, so I looked them up, and I kind of was taken aback by some of these titles because some of them were never released. Some of them weren't released until much later, years later. So I'm going to go over that now. The cartridges that we're going to sell for $19.95 are 280 Zap and Dodge 'em, part of the Action Skill series. That's model or part number 2001. It was a 2K cart and it did come out in 1978. I'm going to just talk about 280 Zap just for a moment here because a lot of people think the 280 is part of the part number or model number or the cartridge number or something. That is not the case. This cartridge is based on the arcade game 280 Zap, and 280 is the kind of car you're driving. It's a Datsun 280. Another cartridge that was available for about $20 was Seawolf Bombardier. This was part of the Action Skill series. It's cart number 2002. It was 2K cart. Not too long thereafter, even before Astrocade took over, this cart was renamed to Seawolf Missile. The Seawolf Bombardier was released. There's some out there, but they're pretty rare. Clown's Brickyard was available. It's part of the Action Skill series. It's number 2004. It's a 4K cart. That's a pretty good game. It's like Breakout, basically. And Clowns is like Circus Atari. Cartridge number 3003 was going to be called Grand Prix Demolition Derby. This cartridge was not released by Bally. It was released later, in 1981, so 3 years later, and it was released by Astrocade. It's part of the Action Skill series, and the cartridge model number was changed to 2014, and that was a 4K cart. Cartridge number 3004 was called Desert Fox Drag Race. That was not released, never was released. If you're curious to see what it looks like, the catalog that was released by Bally in 1978, it's called the Bally Videocades Cassette Catalog. It has a picture of this game. I think both games actually. Cartridge number 4001 was called Elementary Math, Bingo Math, part of the educational series. This was cartridge, this was a 2K cart. I have a memory of a game just like this that I used to have on the Commodore 64. I think it might have actually been called Bingo Math. I had to get that because it pleased my parents because it was educational. Cartridge number 5001 is Amazing Maze and Tic-Tac-Toe. It's part of the strategy series. It's 2K cart. Amazing Maze is actually pretty fun with 2 players. Cartridge number 5003 is yet another cartridge that was not released. This would have been checkers and backgammon. And if that had been released for $20, that would have been a pretty good deal. And for this game, I'm going to take a little bit out of the Bally Arcade vac. The backgammon part disappeared in ads from 1979, and a prototype did turn up in 1985 or so at Don Gladden's, but it was only checkers. The backgammon game has may never have been finished. Checkers, however, was sold after 1984 by Mike White or Don Gladden, but only a few were made. Now the checkers cartridge is available as a ROM image, and you can play it under emulation. I have not really messed around with it too much, but it is there if you want it. So the cartridges that were available for $24.95 are Panzer Attack Red Baron. That's part of the Action Skill series. That's a 4K cart. Chris and I discussed that in the last podcast. Star Battle, cartridge 2005, which is, I think, probably the worst game in the Bally Arcade library, and we're including such stinkers as Elementary Math and Bingo Math. Weirdly, a lot of people seem to think this game is pretty neat because it's basically the Death Star battle, but it has terrible play control. I think it's very hard to play. Another game was called Tornado Baseball, Tennis, Hockey, and Handball. So 3 of those games are basically just Pong clones. This is part of the sports series. Tornado Baseball, actually, though, is a baseball game, if you can figure that out pretty easily, but it's not a Pong kind of variant or anything like that. It's actually based on an arcade game called Tornado Baseball that was released in, I think, 1976. And in 1980, there was a sequel called Extra Bases, but that only came out for the arcade. Football is going to be available pretty soon. I already talked about that a few minutes ago. An educational cartridge, number 4002. It's a 4K cart, and this one is called Letter Match, Spell and Score, and Crosswords. What's interesting about that is I knew this existed, and I knew it was released, and I have it, but I don't think I've actually loaded it up except for like maybe once. Another cartridge is a 4K cart for $25. It's Blackjack, it's got poker, and it's got another game I'm not familiar with called AC Doocy. Anyone know how to play that one? Now the last cartridge that's mentioned is number 4003. This was going to be Music Maker, or Music Maker 1, or Music Composer. It was started by Bally before 1979 as 2 cartridges, but it was never released. When Astrocade came out, a development went into a 2000 baud tape interface. A prototype was sent to George Moses with a keypad overlay and instructions. And in 1985, a full 7 years later, Leroy Flam engineered circuit boards that supported the tape interface. This cartridge never saw an official release. However, 32 working units with a built-in tape interface were made by Mike White, and he retyped those instructions, and they were the very last pages of the Arcadian, Volume 7, pages 95 through 102. After that, there was nothing else. That game was written by Scott Norris. I have this game. I've tried it out. I don't really understand how to make music without a cartridge, so trying to use a cartridge doesn't help me too much. Maybe I'll try to con and Chris to work with me a little bit on how to use it. I have tried to use the tape interface to save and load. I've never been able to make that function, even just by typing a few notes on the screen and saving and then reloading it back. Even if I try to digitally archive them, never been able to do it. I don't know if my cartridge is messed up or not, but it's unfortunate that it doesn't work. But it is a pretty program to try out, at least. And if you're interested, it's available as a free download, as a ROM image. That wraps up this segment for the month. Next month, we'll be covering Arcadian issues 3 and 4. That's going to be the January 1979 and February 1979 issues of the newsletter. See you then. In the September 1977 issue of Scientific American, JS&A took out an ad, a 3-page ad actually, to try to sell the Bally Home Library Computer. They did a pretty good job. I guess they got a lot of orders. Due to circumstances beyond their control, the system didn't ship until about January. It's when, end of January, early February of 1978, 4 months later, is when people started to receive them. And as I've discussed in previous episodes, people didn't even get the basic cartridge until September, so 9 months later after that. So in September 1978 is when Basic was first shipped, which is when the Arcadian starts up. You know this already because you've been listening to the show. In the early days of the Arcadian's newsletter, the precursor to the Arcadian, one of the major things that was talked about was JS&A and their inability to ship the units to their customers. And so there was a lot of heated exchange, sort of, I guess, back and forth between customers, and some of that has been documented in the archive of the Bob Fabris collection. So I want to read one letter that is from the archives and the 2 letters that were actually published in the first issue of the Arcadian. I referenced these earlier and said I'd have a different segment that would concentrate on them, and this is that segment. On February 28, 1979, Bob Fabris received a letter from William Mitchell sometime in February. William Mitchell was the group marketing director for JS&A National Sales Group. And it says, "Dear customer, enclosed you will find your Bally Home Library Computer. We really appreciate your patience, and we are confident that you will have many years of enjoyment with your new unit." Now this is the part of the letter that's very interesting, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to upgrade to the add-under. Here they call it the add-on module. This unit never shipped. It is the primary reason many people bought the Bally unit, because in the original the original ad that JS&A advertised in that September 1977 ad in Scientific American, they talked about the add-on coming out pretty much right away, and it was all glowing reviews from them, and got a lot of people to buy for that. And we're going to get into that, like I said earlier. Paul and I are going to talk about that in more detail over quite a few podcasts, because there's a lot to be said on the matter. It can't all be just summed up, and besides, I don't even know all of that information. I know bits and pieces of it, and I'm learning it by presenting it here to you. I didn't realize I was going to be having an educational podcast, but here we are in the midst of it already. The letter continues. "When you purchase the add-on module, you will receive, free of charge, the $100 bargain ordering package. This will give you access to our main JS&A computer here in Northbrook, Illinois. You will be able to order directly through our computer and receive discounts on many items, plus the fastest service possible. The telephone coupler can also be used for other applications." What they're talking about here is if you buy an add-on, the add-under, which they call the add-on, if you purchase that from JS&A and they give you a date you have to purchase it by, you will get, free of charge, a modem. And apparently this modem was going to be able to dial directly into JS&A so you could place orders. Remember, this letter was received in February of 1978. Who was placing orders online at the time? How was payment going to be made? How was that going to be possible? But they were talking about it. I love it. I think it's unrealistic, and I think it was unrealistic of people to expect it at the time, but it was in the ad. People wanted it. Also included with the purchase of the add-on module will be a diagnostic cartridge, which will be your in-house serviceman. Now, this sounds like something that Don Draper would say on Mad Men. If you know him, he'll lie to you. He'll tell you something straight to your face, which is, in this case, is basically, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it. It's going to overheat. You just plug in this cartridge," and they say, and I'm going to quote here, "Should your unit ever malfunction, it will diagnose which module is defective and designate which component on that module is malfunctioning. You could then either request or replace part, or return the entire circuit board for replacement." Now that's the last thing they say about that. The Bally Home Library Computer will be sold by our company in the spring of 1978 for $220. When you first see this price, you might be a little shocked. But upon our explanation, I think you will see how much more value that you are getting. For $220, the purchaser will receive just the basic unit with no pistol grips, no diagnostic cartridge, and no $100 hardware ordering package. The pistol grips will be offered as an optional item for $29 a pair, and the cartridge for $20. If you add up the value of what you've received, it totals $400. And they kind of go on in this letter about what a bargain you're going to get if you order early. Well, hopefully no one fell for that, because that never shipped. Basically, it ends up going into a little more details there, and the last paragraph says, "We trust that you will be impressed with your current system and its expansion possibilities. Again, we sincerely appreciate your understanding during this very embarrassing delay. Thank you very much for your order, and please feel free to write to us if you have any further questions." I find it admirable that they apologize in a letter like this, but they had a lot more to do, and in the end, they basically abandoned the Bally market, and I don't really blame them. This next letter is the first one that's published in the Arcadian's first issue. It is, I think it was received by Bob in middle of February 1978. In fact, he has a received date on it of October 19th. So what happens here is almost a reversal of what you hear in the first letter I just read to you, which was written in February. And so now this is October, many months later. And get this, while some people got their units in January and February, most people did not get their Bally Arcades yet. So this says, "Dear customer, as you are well aware, there has been a delay in the shipment of your Bally unit." Now, imagine getting this letter 11 months after you've placed your order. I don't know if people were able to get their money back, but people certainly did wait. I mean, people talk about waiting for their units for a year in their Arcadian newsletter. The delays have been caused by almost every problem imaginable and have lasted almost 1 year now. Bally, however, is now in full production, and there appears to be no production problems. In addition to the delays, there are serious doubts in our mind as to whether Bally will produce the add-on module we refer to in our advertisements. Bally refuses to make a commitment to us to produce the add-on module. They indicate that if they do proceed with the system, it won't be until June 1979 when their unit will be available. Even the cost of the system is yet undetermined, but is estimated to be around $600, well above the price they led us to believe the unit would cost. Bally feels 90% positive that they will complete their commitment to us despite their reluctance to sign a definitive agreement. JS&A, on the other hand, refuses to continue a business relationship with them without the positive assurances that the add-on module will indeed be produced soon. Every fact presented in our advertising literature was verified by the Bally organization prior to its publication. We tried our best to offer what, in our opinion, was the best product of its kind on the market, but the Bally organization let us down. In the course of trying to get a commitment from Bally, JS&A was approached by a major U.S. corporation whose name is more recognizable than the Bally's. And they go on and they kind of say that they might have another unit. It's kind of pathetic. What they're end up explaining to the customer here is they're not going to be selling the Bally anymore. They still have the customer's money. The customer does not have a Bally unit. They're going to be getting some other computer by some other manufacturer, not Bally. I don't know what computer they're even referring to. They don't say here, and I can't recall it off the top of my head. But you'll have the choice of getting this new unit when they announce it nationally in December. Or, if you still want, you can get your Bally unit, which of course you've had on order for a year now by December, or over a year. So, if I was this customer and I received this letter, I would freaking go out of my head. They finish up with this last paragraph. In either case, we are indeed sorry for the delay and inconvenience caused you. Enclosed is a questionnaire and postage-paid reply envelope so you may express your decision to us regarding our offer. We would appreciate it if you would fill out the questionnaire and return it in the enclosed envelope as we can determine your intentions. Again, thank you for your patience. Now, on one side, I have to admire that they did this at all. On the other side, it's a shame that they had to. I don't know the details, and I really do want to find them out. So, while you might have been the customer who just received that letter, at the same time, some people did get their Bally units, and these people got a completely different letter, which would make perfect sense, right? Their letter begins, this is also from October 1978, by the way. Bob Fabris received this on October 11th. The letter begins, "Dear customer, we trust you have your Bally Home Library Computer and have found it quite satisfactory. Very shortly, Bally will be releasing some of their new game cartridges and educational programs, and we plan to advise you of those upon their release. You've no doubt realized that practically the entire Bally program has been delayed. The problems with production, FCC approval delays, and late delivery of parts are past, and we don't wish to rehash history." I bet they don't, right? We clearly made a mistake by offering the basic unit in advance of seeing an actual production model, and quite frankly, we've never experienced a backorder problem like the one we've had with this unit. Because of this bad experience with the Bally unit, we have been quite concerned with Bally's future plans concerning the add-on module. To assure our customers of a reasonable delivery date, we requested long ago that Bally supply us with a firm commitment. And part of this letter here is basically what was summed up in the last one. So I'm not going to go over that again. After they go on and explain kind of what they did in the other one about the circumstances that led to the delay of the Bally add-on, they say, We were told by Bally representatives that all of the statements we made in our advertisements were correct. Because of delays and, in our opinion, inexperience on their part, they have obviously let us down. We feel it our obligation to advise you and question your interest in the add-on module. It is not our intention to get into a legal battle with Bally. I bet they want to, though. We feel that by cooperating with them in the event that they do not produce the add-on module, we can still protect our customers' interest by producing the unit ourselves. What were they thinking of getting themselves into by saying something like that? Gosh. When the unit is available, because of its higher price, we will discount it as low as possible to provide the unit to you at the price we originally quoted you, or as close to it as possible, and we will do all we can to in advance to the June delivery date. We have already seen a working prototype of the add-on module. We fully intend to sell it, and Bally feels that they will proceed, but we also felt it our obligation to advise you of the reasons for the delays. This letter ends on a note similar to the last one. It says here, we need your commitment to us regarding your desire to purchase the add-on module so that we may reserve production time with Bally. Would you please jot down the answers to the questions listed and return them to us? Now, what the heck do they mean by that? To reserve production time with Bally. Were they going to try to manufacture this themselves? I really don't know. It seems confusing. If I was a customer, I would have thrown my Bally out the window. Luckily, I didn't get my Bally until the 90s. I didn't have to put up with this. For all I know, JS&A was still shipping Bally to their customers in 1994 when I got mine, or so. About that time anyway. Maybe there were still some people still waiting that paid in September 1977, and were finally getting them when I was buying mine for 50 cents at the flea market. Next month, I'll be covering some feedback that the Arcadian will be getting in letters since they've had their first issue. Until then, just be happy you've got an Astrocade that works, or an emulator you can try out, because if this was 1978, you'd still be waiting to get one. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening. You can always reach us at our email. Mine is ballyalley@hotmail.com. You can reach me on Atari Age at Bally Alley.
Or if you want to write to me for some reason, I'm Chris++ on Atari Age. So just send me a private message or whatever. There's also a thread about the podcast in the Bally Astrocade subforum. Spit it out, Chris. And thanks from me as well. Hope you dug it.
I like to end the show with a little bit of music each episode. Usually I've been choosing music that's a little more popular that you could buy on tape, or you could, I haven't yet, but in the future I'll probably include stuff that was typed in, or you could type in from the Arcadian. This month I'm going to choose a piece of music for two reasons. One, it was written by Peggy Gladden. She was the wife at the time of Don Gladden. He wrote this month's basic game, Missile Defense. The other reason I chose this is because the song is called Happy Days. And I kind of did it as a tribute to Floppy Days, the podcast that Randy Kindig does. I enjoyed that podcast quite a bit. It's not exactly what I expected it to be when I first began listening to it, but he does a pretty good job of getting guest hosts and other people to contribute to his show to make it really lively, and I like it. And this most recent episode, for instance, was about the HP 41C calculator. Not something I would normally ever listen to, but somehow it was still interesting. I found myself kind of comparing it in some ways in my own head, because I've got Astrocade on the brain, I guess, to when he's talking about the newsletters that were available for the HP 41. I was thinking, wow, the Arcadian had a newsletter, and they also seem to write similar programs. People wanted to play Lunar Lander on both platforms, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, Peggy Gladden wrote this. It was originally written for, I don't know if it was written for, but it was included on an Astrobugs Club Tape number 2 in March 1983. So it's quite a bit jumping ahead to here. The Astrobugs was a user group. The Bugs was actually kind of, I don't know if it was national, but they had several of them in different cities around the United States, and Bugs stood for Bally User Group. Simple, right? So enjoy the music. I think you'll like it. If you get a chance, maybe you can check out the Astrobugs Club Tape number 2. It included several different programs on it. For instance, it had a game called Starbase. It had a reissue of Whack-A-Mole by Wavemakers, another one by them called Memory Lane. I had another song by Peggy. Maybe we'll end up with that one at the end of another episode sometime. That one was Rockin' Robin. It actually sounds pretty good. I don't know for sure, but I imagine that she used George Moses' 3-voice music program in order to input these scores into her Astrocade and save them. So enjoy the song. It's pretty short. And give a listen to the Floppy Days podcast. You'll like it. Neat thing about this is actually the building he works at. So this is actually in Albuquerque. This is a real place.
Did you just ask him one day?
Yeah, you know Paul. Oh, they don't know you know Paul.
I didn't know you had friends.
Number 9, 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 number 9.